Shalom, everyone. This is Pastor Roy Blight. Today on Torah Tuesday, we're looking at Vayatse, and it's a very interesting Torah portion. And this is the Old Covenant portion, the Torah part of it. And as we look at Vayatse, we're looking at some very interesting concepts that have to do with a lot that we discuss all the time as far as the Bible's concerned. So let's go ahead and get into our Torah portion right now. As we look at our Torah portion, the overall theme of this, the overriding concept of everything we're talking about is building on a firm foundation. And as we venture into our Torah portion, we're looking at Vayatse. This is parashah number 7. And he went out. And this is from Genesis 28 to Genesis 32. And as we look at this, we're looking at the betrayal of Jacob and Isaac. We're looking at this family issue that happened in last week's parashah and told how Jacob had successfully supplanted his twin brother Esau by obtaining the blessing as the heir of the chosen family. However, since Esau had threatened to get the blessing back by means of murder, Jacob fled for Haran to stay with his uncle Laban until things would cool off. And in Vayatse, what we're looking at today from the book of Genesis is named, and it means, he went out. So this is the journey of Jacob. The title comes from the first verse of the reading, which says, "And Jacob went out from Beersheba." This portion tells of the story of Jacob's flight from his brother Esau, his vision at Bethel, his employment with his uncle Laban, and his marriage to the two sisters Rachel and Leah. Jacob's double marriage results in a baby-bearing contest that gives him 11 sons. And at the end of the portion, Jacob leaves Laban and returns to the land of Canaan, but not before Laban tries to stop him. Now, we see this all begins at Bethel. It says Jacob left or went out from Vayatse, Beersheba, and he went toward Haran. And this is found in Genesis 28. But something amazing happens. While Jacob was on the way to Haran, he came to a certain place and camped there for the night. Using a stone for a pillow, he dreamt of a ladder that was set on the earth and reached to the heavens, with the angels of God ascending and descending upon it. Some dream. Then Jehovah himself stood above the ladder and promised Jacob that his offspring would be like the dust of the earth, and that through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Of course, this is very similar to the exact promise that God had given to Abraham, his grandfather. It says in Genesis 28:15, "Behold, I am with you, and will keep careful watch over you, and guard you wherever you may go. And I will bring you back to this promised land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." And Jacob awakened out of his sleep, and he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome this place is! This is none other than God's house, and this is the gate of heaven." So we see that God is with us. And the promise of God's presence, as we know from studying the New Covenant with Yeshua, Jesus, it's with us always. And we have this hope as an anchor of the soul, it tells us in Hebrews chapter 6. When he awoke from his dream, Jacob was awestruck and called the place, quote unquote, the house of God, or Beit Elohim, and the gate of heaven, Sha'ar HaShamayim. The following morning, he took the stone he had used as a pillow, anointed it with oil, and consecrated the place as Bet-El, or Bethel, or Bethel, house of God. And this is a very important and central thing that has happened now. Then he made a vow that if Jehovah would be with him, providing for his needs until he returned home to Beersheba, he would tithe to God 1/10 of all his possessions and would return to worship and pray at the altar he had just consecrated. It says, Jacob vowed a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and clothing to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, and the Lord will be my God, then this stone which I have set up for a pillar will be God's house. Of all that you will give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. And we see that this is exactly where he was. I was talking about our water cooler talk here. When he finally reached Haran, Jacob encountered some shepherds who were gathering their sheep at the local well. And it was the custom there to wait for all the flocks to arrive before removing the stone and watering the animals. Afterward, the stone would be placed back over the mouth of the well. After inquiring about the welfare of his uncle Laban, the shepherds pointed out to him his beautiful cousin Rachel, who was also a shepherd bringing her father's flock to the well. Of course, the Hebrew pronunciation of Rachel is Rachel. Jacob immediately rolled away the stone from the mouth of the well, watered her flock, then weeping, he greeted her with a kiss. Rachel ran home and told her father Laban, who was overjoyed to see him. It says in verses 13 and 14, he embraced and kissed him and brought him home. When Jacob had told him his story, Laban exclaimed, you really are my own flesh and blood. Now Laban had two daughters. The older daughter was named Leah, and the younger one was Rachel. There was no sparkle in Leah's eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. Jacob had immediately fallen in love with his cousin Rachel and eagerly agreed to work as Laban's shepherd for 7 years to marry her. So Jacob worked 7 years to pay for Rachel, but his love for her was so strong that it seemed to him but a few days. So Laban invited everyone in the neighborhood and prepared a wedding feast. But that night when it was dark, Laban took Leah to Jacob, and he slept with her. But when Jacob woke in the morning, it was Leah. What have you done to me? Jacob raged at Laban. I worked 7 years for Rachel. Why have you tricked me? It's not our custom here to marry off a younger daughter ahead of the firstborn, Laban replied. But wait until the bridal week is over. Then we'll give you Rachel too, provided you promise to work another 7 years for me. So Jacob slept with Rachel too, and he loved her much more than Leah. He then stayed and worked for Laban the additional 7 years. And now we look at Jacob's children that come about from these two unions he had, these two wives that Jacob had. Next comes the account of the birth of the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. This is where it all comes from. When Jehovah saw that Leah was unloved by Jacob, he opened her womb while her sister Rachel remained childless. Leah gave birth to Jacob's first 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Then there was a time when she, too, did not conceive. In Genesis 30, it says, when Rachel saw that she wasn't having any children for Jacob, she became jealous of her sister. She pleaded with Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Then Jacob became furious with Rachel. Am I God? He asked. He's the one who has kept you from having children. Then Rachel told him, take my maid Bilhah and sleep with her. She will bear children for me, and through her I can have a family too. Bilhah bore Jacob's next 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. In the madness of the sibling rivalry, Leah thought she had stopped being able to bear children, so she gave her handmaiden Zilpah to Jacob as a surrogate wife also. Zilpah then bore 2 sons, Gad and Asher. But Leah was not finished with her childbearing after all. One day during the wheat harvest, Reuben found some mandrakes, he was the oldest son, growing in a field and brought them to his mother. Rachel begged Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But Leah angrily replied, wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Now will you steal my son's mandrakes too? Rachel answered, I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of the mandrakes. So that evening, as Jacob was coming home from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. You must come and sleep with me tonight, she said. I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found. So that night he slept with Leah. And God answered Leah's prayers. She became pregnant again and gave birth to a 5th son for Jacob. She named him Issachar. Then Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to a 6th son for Jacob. She named him Zebulun. Then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. God has removed my disgrace, she said, and she named him Joseph or Yosef. In next week's parasha, we will read about Jacob's 12th son, Benjamin. But this is Jacob's family up till now. There's four women that had births that were all the sons of Jacob. There's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali. These are the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. And we see this is the names are very important to understand too. Reuben means see a son. Simeon means hearing or heard. Levi means joined to or attached. Judah means praised. Dan is a judge. Naphtali means wrestling. Gad means a troop or company. Asher means happy. Issachar, there is recompense. Zebulun means exalted and honored. Joseph means may he add. And Benjamin means son of the right hand. And it all matters. These are the sons of Jacob, and this is the heritage, this is the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, after Joseph was born, the 11th son, Jacob wanted to return to Beersheba to see his parents and to settle back in the promised land. Laban wanted Jacob and his family to stay with him and his household. He thought maybe Jacob was beginning to feel insecure with his position in the family. Please listen to me, Laban replied. I have become wealthy, for Jehovah has blessed me because of you. Tell me how much I owe you, whatever it is, I'll pay it. Jacob replied, You know how hard I've worked for you, and how your flocks and herds have grown under my care. You had little indeed before I came, but your wealth has increased enormously. Jehovah has blessed you through everything I've done. But now, what about me? When can I start providing for my own family? What wages do you want? Laban asked again. Jacob replied, Don't give me anything. Just do this one thing, and I'll continue to tend and watch over your flocks. Let me inspect your flocks today and remove all the sheep and goats that are speckled or spotted, along with all the black sheep. Give these to me as my wages. In the future, when you check on the animals you have given me as my wages, you'll see that I have been honest. If you find in my flock any goats without speckles or spots, or any sheep that are not black, you will know that I have stolen them from you. All right, Laban replied. It will be as you say. But that very day Laban went out and removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted or had white patches, and all the black sheep. He placed them in the care of his own sons, who took them a 3 days' journey from where Jacob was. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took some fresh branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and peeled off strips of bark, making white streaks on them. Then he placed these peeled branches in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, and that was where they mated. And when they mated in front of the white streaked branches, they gave birth to young that were streaked, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated those lambs from Laban's flock, and at mating time he turned the flock to face Laban's animals that were streaked or black. This is how he built his own flock instead of increasing Laban's. Whenever the stronger females were ready to mate, Jacob would place the peeled branches in the watering troughs in front of them. Then they would mate in front of the branches. But he didn't do this with the weaker ones, so the weaker lambs belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones were Jacob's. As a result, Jacob became very wealthy with large flocks of sheep and goats, female and male servants, and many camels and donkeys. Despite his father-in-law's repeated attempts to cheat him, Jacob prospered since God was with him. Remember, God is with us. He's our firm foundation. This is the promise of God's presence in our life. Again, Hebrews 6:19. We have as an anchor for the soul. So we see that the focus is on the good. We looked at this portion of Jacob doing this with his sheep and his goats. What Jacob caused the sheep and goats to look at, to focus on, was the thing that was reproduced in their lives. This became a principle of Scripture. We saw this when we talked about the feasts being observed year by year, foreshadowing the work of salvation. Jehovah placing the tabernacle in the center of the camp for them to see and minister in daily is another example, with 7 figures that present the same images that the 7 feasts suggest. Consider these passages. It's if he were here on earth, he would not even be a priest, since there already are priests who offer the gifts required by the law. They serve in a system of worship that is only a copy, a shadow of the real one in heaven. For when Moses was getting ready to build the tabernacle, God gave him this warning: be sure that you make everything according to the pattern I have shown you here on the mountain. Of course, this is Exodus 25 and spoken of in Hebrews chapter 8. When Jehovah began preparing his people to live in accordance with his kingdom by placing a type of his kingdom in the middle of their camp and teaching them to minister to him there. Then the Father sent his Son to the tabernacle with his people, and they beheld his glory. He was all light, and there was no darkness in him. So we're to walk as children of light, but we see this example throughout the scriptures. In Philippians, Paul writes, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of a good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. We need to have our eyes and our minds focused. It tells us in Romans, consider yourselves to be dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus. In Colossians, it says, since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, not on earthly things. Precisely what Jacob was doing with his sheep and goats, focusing their attention. After 6 more years of service, Jacob received a vision from Jehovah, telling him it was time to return to the land promised to his descendants. It says, for I have seen how Laban has treated you. I am the God who appeared to you at Bethel, the place where you anointed the pillar of stone and made your vow to me. Now get ready and leave this country and return to the land of your birth. Jacob discussed the matter with Rachel and Leah, revealing that it had been in a dream that an angel had given him the idea to ask for the streaked and the speckled goats. Rachel and Leah had no objection to leaving. They felt no obligation to their father. Jacob decided it was time. He would flee from the clutches of Laban while he was away shearing sheep, since by this point it was apparent that his father-in-law never would let him leave in peace. Just before the flight from Haran, Rachel stole her father's idols, perhaps intending to cause him bad luck. It was 3 days later, when Laban discovered that Jacob had fled, he gathered his men and pursued him, finally catching up to him 7 days later at the mountain of Gilead. And this is way back toward the land of Canaan now. But the previous night, God had appeared to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream and told him, I'm warning you, leave Jacob alone. Remember, God is with us. The promise of God's presence is with us. Laban rebuked his son-in-law for having left by stealth and accused him of stealing his idols. Jacob denied the accusation and unwittingly proclaimed that the real thief would die, which is a prophecy that was later to be fulfilled with the premature death of Rachel. Remember, life and death are in the power of the tongue. After searching through Jacob's possessions, which proved fruitless since Rachel had carefully hidden the idols, Jacob was able to finally give his father-in-law peace of his mind. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the father of Isaac, had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Laban and Jacob then parted after making a peace treaty attested to by a pile of stones. It was not very peaceful, but they made it anyhow. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a monument. Then he told his family members, gather some stones. So they gathered stones and piled them in a heap. Then Jacob and Laban sat down beside the pile of stones to eat a covenant meal. Laban, who was from Padan Aram, or Syria today, called the pile of stones Yegar Sahaduta, which is Aramaic, but Jacob called it Galed, which is Hebrew for heap of witness. It is evident here that Jacob and his posterity would be set apart from their distant relatives they had often partnered with in the past. These relatives had developed their own language, but Jacob and his family had kept Hebrew as their language, officially becoming a separate nation. See this pile of stones, Laban continued, and see this monument I've set between us? They stand between us as witnesses of our vows. I will never pass this pile of stones to harm you, and you must never pass these stones or this monument to harm me. In other words, you stay on your side, I'll stay on my side. He said, I call on the God of our ancestors, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of my grandfather Nahor, to serve as a judge between us. So Jacob took an oath before the fearsome God of his father Isaac to respect the boundary line. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice to God there on the mountain and invited everyone to a convenient feast. After they had eaten, they spent the night on the mountain. Then Laban declared, this pile of stones will stand as a witness to remind us of the covenant we have made today. This explains why it was called Gilead, which means witness pile. But it was also called Mitzpah, which means watchtower. For Laban said, may Jehovah keep watch between us to make sure that we keep this covenant when we are out of sight, out of each other's sight. If you mistreat my daughters or if you marry other wives, God will see it even if no one else does. He is a witness to this covenant between us. So this is made in the land of Gilead. As Jacob started making his way back to the land of Canaan, he was met by angels from the Lord, from God. When he saw the angels, he exclaimed, this is God's camp, and called the name of the place Machanaim, which means two camps. What we see in Scripture is whenever Jehovah appeared to anyone, the place he visited became thought of as sacred. An altar would be set up as a memorial. Just like when Moses and Elijah met with Yeshua, Peter was there. Peter said to Yeshua, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up these three shelters or booths for one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. One place that stands out as being similar to the place where Jacob encountered angels is the Mount of Transfiguration, where Yeshua took him, Peter, James, and John. While the three disciples watched, his appearance became heavenly, and he met with Moses and Elijah. The three of them discussed the plan of God for Yeshua to become the sacrifice bringing salvation to the world. But Moses and Elijah had had mountaintop experiences during their ministries. Elijah's was when he won victory over the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. It says in 1 Kings 18, then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. So all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of Jehovah that was broken down. And Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of Jehovah had come, saying, Israel shall be your name. Then with the stones he built an altar in the name of Jehovah. Remember, as new covenant worshipers, we have 12 stones that were laid for the building of the temple that we are now a part of. These 12 stones are the 12 apostles, chosen and consecrated by God. At Mahanaim for Jacob, on the Mount of Transfiguration for Yeshua, Mount Sinai for Moses, and Mount Carmel for Elijah. Excuse me. In each of these places, it seemed like two worlds met. They hadn't left earth, yet they were experiencing heaven. Now the parashah ends with Jacob sending messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Edom, explaining that he was returning to his homeland after his long sojourn in Haran. In Psalm 33:22, it says, "Let your loving kindness be on us, Jehovah, since we have hoped in you." And the parashah ends with this tension in the heart of Jacob coming to light because what he did before, some 20 years before, with his brother Esau, and he was coming to deal with it, and he knew the Lord was with him, but he also knew that Esau had threatened to kill him. So we leave it there in our Torah portion in Vayatse and understand that sometimes, as we say, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. This is where the Torah takes us next week as we return to the subject of Jacob facing Esau. Well, this week, have a great week. We'll talk to you next week on Torah Tuesday. Have a great week. God bless. Shalom.